transcript of friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the single greatest crisis facing the United States is not military or political, but a profound collapse in respect for its own workforce? And what if this crisis in respect is the direct cause of the crumbling roads, failing power grids, and soaring costs that define modern American life? The United States finds itself caught in a profound and deepening paradox. How did this happen? How did the backbone of the nation, a term once used with genuine reverence, become a demographic so dismissed and devalued? The answer is not a simple modern phenomenon. The erosion of blue-collar pride is not merely a consequence of globalization or automation. Instead, it is a recurring chapter in a much older story, a destructive cycle seen throughout the rise and fall of history's most powerful empires. The collapse of great powers is rarely caused by a single military defeat or a sudden lack of resources, but by the slow, systemic, and willing abandonment of the very people who built them. This pattern of societal abandonment is painfully illustrated in the fall of the Roman Republic. The foundation of Rome's dominance was its plebeian class. These were not simply the urban poor. They were the Republic's economic and militaristic engine, a population of skilled workers, potters, blacksmiths, carpenters, builders, and small landowners. During the protracted Punic Wars, this class was mobilized on a massive scale for military conflicts that lasted so long many fathers left for war only to be joined on the battlefield by their sons a decade later. While this backbone bled for the Republic, an immense and irreversible wealth inequality took root back home. Wealthy senators insulated from the conflict began consolidating plebeian land into massive private estates or latifundia. This ancient land grab mirrors the modern forecast that institutional investors are projected to own over 7.66 million homes, or over 40% of single-family rentals by 2030. Simultaneously, the Roman Senate engineered the devaluation of its own skilled citizenry. It flooded the local labor market with a glut of discounted or enslaved labor captured in its wars. This influx systematically undercut the wages of free Roman tradesmen, erased the value of their craft, and hollowed out the skill set of an entire generation, forcing the working class into total dependence on the state. Every attempt at reform was blocked by the greed of those in power, and the resulting instability culminated in a series of civil wars that finally collapsed the Republic. Even as Rome transitioned into an empire and ushered in a golden age of infrastructure, building over 50,000 miles of roads, it had already sealed its fate. It repeated the same pattern of societal abandonment, rotting from the inside until its eventual spectacular collapse. Centuries later, the British Empire repeated the cycle. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Great Britain became the first nation in history to undergo large-scale industrialization. By 1850, it was the undisputed workshop of the world, producing over two-thirds of the world's coal, half of its iron, and 40% of its steel. This global dominance was not forged by its aristocracy. It was built by the calloused hands of its working class, the factory workers, shipbuilders, iron workers, and miners who labored in horrific conditions. Yet, as Britain's elite profited immensely from this growth, they demonstrated a fatal lack of domestic loyalty. Instead of reinvesting capital into their own workforce, their own industries, or their own infrastructure, they aggressively shifted their wealth overseas. Between 1865 and 1914, British investors poured as as much money into the infrastructure of Africa, Asia, and Latin America as they did into the United Kingdom itself. This colossal capital flight, a precursor to modern globalization, had devastating consequences. Local industries were abandoned, wages stagnated, and the working class neighborhoods across northern England, the very heart of the industrial engine, began a long, slow fall into decline, compelled to defend its sprawling, overextended empire through two world wars. Britain exhausted its treasury and saw its industrial core physically devastated. In the post-war era, with even less capital for domestic manufacturing, Britain pivoted to prioritizing a service economy, allowing its industrial towns to collapse under foreign competition and cultural neglect. The empire that had once dominated the world willingly abandoned the people who built it, succumbing to the same cycle as Rome. The American story begins with a similar, if more subtle, seeding of this hierarchical divide. During the nation's own industrial revolution, the economy transformed, and the growing demand for specialized skills prompted higher education to shift from purely classical studies toward practical fields like agriculture, engineering, and mechanical arts. While this broadened access, college remained an elite institution, positioning its graduates for the new managerial and administrative roles required to run these burgeoning industries. This created a new practical hierarchy. This divide was soon culturally codified, giving birth to our modern terminology. Detachable white collars became a practical symbol of status for office workers, allowing for a clean, starched appearance removed from the grime of production. In contrast, durable, dark cold work shirts, typically blue and gray, were marketed for their practicality and ability to hide dirt, becoming synonymous with manual labor. This visual distinction was quickly cemented into a social one. American author Horatio Alger popularized a new national myth with his Rag Dick novels, which sold over 20 million copies. These stories championed the idea that any individual could escape poverty through hard work and perseverance. But the key to this rags to riches narrative was not just hard work, it was a transformation. The protagonists achieved success by shedding their blue collar origins, adopting the appearance, manner, and most importantly, the occupation of the white collar world. The implicit message was clear. One did not succeed in manual labor, one succeeded by escaping it. For a brief shining moment, however, the United States seemed poised to break this historical cycle. The post-World War era represented a golden age for the American worker. After emerging from the war as the world's undisputed manufacturing powerhouse, the nation turned its industrial might inward. The American factory worker, from Detroit's auto plants to Pittsburgh's steel mills, became the unambiguous symbol of national strength and prosperity. This was not a myth, it was a statistical reality. Wages rose by over 60% between 1939 and 1944. A robust, unified middle class emerged, one in which factory workers and office managers could afford the same homes, live side by side in the new sprawling suburbs, and realistically expect a better future for their children. This era of blue-collar pride, however, was soon to be systematically dismantled by a powerful one-to-two punch, the GI Bill in the Cold War. The GI Bill, while a revolutionary program that democratized higher education, had an unintended consequence. It cemented the college degree as the primary pathway to the American dream. Over 7.8 million veterans utilized the program by 1956, creating a new college-educated professional class that amplified the perceived status of white-collar work. Then in 1957, the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik triggered a profound psychological break in the American consciousness. The satellite's beep, beep, beep from orbit was interpreted as a sign of intellectual and scientific inferiority. The Cold War immediately reframed higher education as an urgent matter of national security. In 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, which poured unprecedented levels of federal funding into strengthening education in science, mathematics, and foreign languages. The national priority fundamentally shifted from building things to pursuing ideas. Vocational skills, once the engine of victory, were now implicitly framed as secondary, less sophisticated, and less critical to the nation's future. The cultural narrative was set. College was the only path to success, and any other choice was a failure. This cultural shift was quickly exploited by a new ruthless corporate ideology that emerged in the 1970s and 80s. The post-war social contract in which major corporations adhered to a retain and reinvest model was shattered. This old model had emphasized vertical integration and internal mobility, viewing employees as long-term assets to be trained and promoted from within. It was replaced by a new predatory philosophy, downsize and distribute. The moral justification for this shift was provided in 1970 by economist Milton Friedman. His Friedman doctrine argued that the one and only social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits. This idea was revolutionary, liberating corporations from any perceived obligation to their employees, their communities, or their nation. The avatar of this new doctrine was General Electric CEO Jack Welch, nicknamed Neutron Jack for his aggressive cost cutting that eliminated jobs while leaving buildings intact. Welch initiated the first great wave of American manufacturing labor being outsourced overseas, roughly 115,000 jobs between 1981 and 1985. He reframed American jobs not as foundational assets, but as disposable costs to be minimized, famously stating, "Dealey, you'd have every plant you own on a barge." This philosophy was given a powerful legal incentive. In 1982, the SEC adopted Rule 10b-18, which effectively legalized stock buybacks. This rule shielded companies from accusations of market manipulation and created a new primary use for corporate profits. Instead of reinvesting earnings into research, innovation, or workforce training, corporations began funneling that money directly to shareholders to boost stock prices. Between 2003 and 2012 alone, S&P 500 companies allocated 54% of their earnings, a sum of $2.4 trillion, to stock buybacks and another 37% to dividends. This left minimal resources for the domestic workforce, cementing the corporate abandonment of the American worker. As corporate strategy shifted, the power of the worker to resist it was decisively broken. The decline of labor unions, which once represented over 30% of the private workforce, was accelerated by hostile policy. In 1981, the Reagan administration fired 11,000 striking air traffic controllers and banned them from federal service for life. This single act sent an unambiguous national message. The era of collective bargaining was over. As union membership plummeted, so did the critical infrastructure for training the next generation of skilled labor. Apprenticeship programs, long hindered by their association with unionized industries, collapsed, declining by 40% between 2003 and 2013. The nation had not only outsourced its jobs, it had dismantled the system for creating its workers. The result of these combined forces was the hollowing out of the American industrial base. As corporations embraced globalization and cost cutting, nearly 6 million U.S. manufacturing jobs disappeared between 2000 and 2010. Manufacturing's share of the gross domestic product, which stood at a robust 27% in 1965, fell to just 12% by 2010. The United States had willingly abdicated its throne, paving the way for China's rise to become the world's manufacturing superpower. As the economic foundation of blue collar work was being destroyed, the cultural reinforcement of its stigma went into overdrive. A 1971 federal report titled Work in America starkly highlighted the near total absence of positive, noble representations of working class roles in media, a sharp contrast to the 1930s. By the 1970s, fewer than 1 in 10 television characters represented blue collar workers. Those who did exist, the forgotten Americans, were increasingly portrayed as crude, uneducated, socially undesirable, or simply as the butt of a joke. This cultural narrative provided a convenient justification for the economic abandonment. If these workers were uneducated and unsophisticated, then perhaps they deserved their declining status. The education system became the final instrument for locking in this stigma. The 1983 A Nation at Risk report, which warned of a rising tide of mediocrity in public education, prioritized purely academic reforms over technical training. This cemented the college for all mentality. Vocational programs like shop class, once a staple of the American high school experience, were increasingly dismissed as outdated, expensive, and reserved for troubled students or those deemed unfit for college. The messaging from all corners of society became singular. 61% of Gen Z report that their parents either never discussed vocational schooling or actively discouraged it. Only 17% of that same generation say they were ever informed about the benefits of a trade career. This reflects an educational system pathologically focused on college readiness at the total expense of practical marketable skills. Assistant Labor Secretary Jerome Rosal pointed out with chilling accuracy back in 1970, all blue-collar workers, skilled or not, have been denigrated so badly, so harshly that their jobs have become a last resort instead of decent, respected careers. This campaign of denigration was not merely economic. It was a psychological and social assault that left deep generational scars on individuals and entire communities. The cultural dismissal of the maker class fostered a profound sense of resentment, humiliation, and hopelessness. It is no coincidence that the very regions of the nation most hollowed out by deindustrialization, the Rust Belt and rural manufacturing hubs, also became the epicenters of devastating social crisis. From the opioid epidemic to the rise in deaths of despair, this was not just an economic collapse. It was a collapse of identity, purpose, and dignity. When a society relentlessly tells a man that his life's work and his father's work before him is worthless, it robs him of more than a paycheck. It creates a vacuum of despair that has been filled by political polarization and social fragmentation, as a population that feels left behind and looked down on lashes out at the very elites who authored their dismissal. At the root of this corrosive stigma is a profound and fundamentally false cultural dichotomy: the separation of knowledge work from manual work. The entire college for all premise was built on the flawed assumption that thinking the manipulation of abstract symbols in an office is an inherently superior human activity to doing which was framed as the repetitive, mindless labor of the uneducated. This is a dangerous and arrogant illusion. The work of a skilled tradesperson is not unintellectual. It is, in fact, a powerful and different kind of intelligence. It is applied physics, material science, geometry, and complex spatial reasoning executed in real time, often under high stakes conditions. A master electrician diagnosing a fault in a complex commercial building is navigating a system that requires a level of abstract understanding and diagnostic acumen that rivals that of a software engineer debugging code. A master welder is not just joining metal, they are mastering metallurgy, managing extreme temperatures, and applying a physical skill that takes a decade to perfect. An automotive diagnostician working on a modern car is interfacing with a dozen worked computers, a task that requires deep systems level thinking. This blue collar work is not mindless, it is mindful. It is the integration of the cognitive and the physical, a form of problem solving that cannot be done from a keyboard. This false hierarchy, this intellectual snobbery, is what has made the nation practically incompetent. We have produced generations of symbolic analysts who can write brilliant memos but cannot fix a leaking pipe, and we have taught them to be proud of this helplessness. This decadal long campaign of economic and cultural degradation was so successful that it created the paradox we see today. A nation desperate for skilled workers and a culture that produces none. But this has led to a recent powerful counter-narrative, one that questions the very definition of a good job. The white-collar ideal, the prize for which generations were told to sacrifice, has revealed its own deep flaws. For many, this prize is a life of crippling anxiety and burnout, a world of, per my last email, robots, an empty corporate bureaucracy. It is a life of 247's connectivity where emails arrive at 900 p.m. and 2 a.m., tethering the worker to the office indefinitely. Furthermore, this white-collar path has become economically precarious. It often requires incurring 50,000 or more in student loan debt only to enter a hyper-competitive job market where a degree is no guarantee of employment. And in a final ironic twist, these knowledge worker jobs in marketing, coding, and finance are proving to be acutely vulnerable to automation by artificial intelligence, a threat far more immediate than a robot that can frame a house or repair a complex plumbing system. In this context, the overlooked virtues of blue collar work have become impossible to ignore. The first virtue is financial. The ability to graduate high school and immediately earn a high wage with no debt is a profound financial advantage. It provides a 4-year head start on saving, investing, and building wealth, allowing for a path to retirement that many debt saddled college graduates cannot imagine. The second virtue is opportunity and demand. In a market starved for skilled labor, job security is high. Wages are rising rapidly. These careers also offer a second chance at a stable middle class life for those who have imperfect backgrounds, such as a criminal record. An opportunity for redemption that the white collar world rarely provides. The third virtue is tangible fulfillment. In an economy of abstract services, blue collar work offers the deep psychological satisfaction of solving real world problems and seeing physical progress at the end of every day. It offers a path to genuine mastery of a craft and a powerful sense of camaraderie built on shared struggle and accomplishment. But the most significant and profound virtue may be the most basic, a true work life balance. The blue-collar job, for all its physical demands, is often one that can be truly left at work. There are no 900 p.m. emails to respond to, no weekend PowerPoint presentations to stress over. This boundary allows workers to go home and be fully present with their families and in their communities. This perhaps is the true definition of the American dream that was lost, not a specific title or salary, but a life where one can feel accomplished at work and truly be at home. And now the bill for decades of neglect has come due. The United States is facing the compounding consequences of its choices. The nation's infrastructure, its roads, bridges, and electrical grid is crumbling, falling decades behind competitors like China because the workforce needed to build and maintain it was systemically devalued and dismantled. The labor force itself is aging. Today, more than 1 in 5 construction workers is 55 years or older. This silver tsunami of retirement signals not just the loss of workers, but the irreversible loss of irreplaceable expertise and mentorship, with no trained generation ready to replace them. A brief, fragile anomaly occurred between 2020 and 2022. Fueled by pandemic-era retirements and depressed immigration, the labor market for low-wage and blue-collar jobs became incredibly tight. For the first time in decades, wage gains for these workers began to outpace those for white-collar professionals. This increased spending power for the bottom half of the economy was a major factor in staving off a widely predicted recession. It was a fleeting real-world demonstration of the economic power this workforce holds. But this trend is already cooling as the Federal Reserve, in its quest to tackle inflation, takes aim at cooling this hot job market. The pay gap remains enormous. The societal abandonment of the blue-collar worker is not just a problem. It is arguably the fundamental problem. The rot at the foundation that underlies the nation's economic instability and physical decay. A solution cannot be found in a single policy. It demands a full-scale national reprioritization, a cultural shift that restores pride and dignity to the work that builds powers and maintains a nation. It requires fair wages, robust training programs, and a new narrative that teaches young people the truth that there is honor, opportunity, and a path to a good life in building the physical world. Until that pride is restored, the United States will continue to follow the historical cycle of empires, a nation that has forgotten and in doing so abandoned the very people who built